The talks had been going on for days, and all that had been agreed was that the humans would be referred to as humans, and the Taraxians would be referred to as Taraxians in any potential treaties that would be signed. Actually, no. The two ambassadors had agreed that they would both only have the one security detail attached to them during these talks. They had just independently stated the former part. And, of course, it had to fall on Mike. This was tedious. So fucking tedious. This was supposed to be a prestigious assignment. Security detail for an ambassadorial mission. Yeah, right. Mike had been given this particular position as a punishment for breaking the corporal's nose during a friendly sparring match. How was it his fault that the corporal had been too slow to avoid his left hook? This was bullshit. The brass had even stated that the incident, as it was quickly being referred to on base, was the corporal's own fault. Complete, utter bullshit. Mike was being punished for decking his boss. Everyone knew it. PFC Mike Korvech stood at attention with his back to the wall, facing the empty hall, his face a blank slate as he stared at the wall on the other side of the corridor. His Taraxian counterpart stood on the other side of the hallway, a similar blank look on his face. Mike looked at the Taraxian. 6 limbs, 2 lower for locomotion, 4 upper for manipulation, a head on his shoulders. Mike thought, if it weren't for the scales, 4 arms and weird bug eyes, the Taraxian could pass off as human. Kind of. Then, after a second, he shook his head. Bullshit, who am I kidding? That bug would be nightmare fuel for anyone who saw it. Mike smiled at his wandering thoughts. He kept on watching the Taraxian. His eyes wandered to the alien's body, covered in metal that seemed to shift and slide with every single one of the Taraxian's body. He gave a small unconscious nod as he thought, neat. Wonder how they get the metal to move like that. When the Taraxian saw the smirk and nod, he tensed. Was this human mocking him? Stupid biped. Not enough arms. How did these bipeds manage with so few limbs? And what was with its eyes? Clearly limited range of vision. If it weren't for my superior's orders, I would rip this miserable human with my bare hands. Light knife Atraxis Mengi studied the human. 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes forward-facing. Atraxis's faceted eyes found it hard to focus on the motionless human, but this soldier's stance made enough movement for Atraxis to be able to study it. He looked down at the human and his gaze stopped on the weapon he had on his side. Solid looking, about the length of the human's forearm, maybe a bit longer. Didn't impede mobility and allowed good control. Smart. Atraxis moved his head for a better view and saw that the heavy-looking weapon seemed to have 2 forms of triggers. Did that mean that it propelled 2 forms of projectiles? Nice. As Atraxis studied the human, Mike studied the Taraxian. His eyes had wandered from the form-fitting metal armor down to his weapon. It looked alien. Mike didn't have a better word for it. The thing looked like a series of bubbles with a bubbling liquid in each. The line of bubbles ended in a funnel, larger end pointing outwards. There were wires running between each bubble. Mike knew intellectually that it was a plasma pulse rifle. Intel had briefed all soldiers of the Terran United Forces about the tech of every single alien species that they were likely to encounter, and Mike was a bit of a gun enthusiast, and couldn't help but stare with envy at the Taraxian gun. Suddenly he realized what he was doing and snapped back to attention. The sudden movement made Atraxis snap to attention too. Not a second too soon as the doors of the conference room flew open, and both Mrs. Kelly O'Hare and his lordship Bejor Kufri stormed out of the room, mumbling loud enough, "Unacceptable, ludicrous, nonsense, illogical." The 2 stand soldiers looked at their respective ambassadors and knew that the talks had not gone well. Mike waited a second for the ambassador to walk past him, before locking step behind her. He noticed the Taraxian guard do the same. The following day, the 2 soldiers were at their post again. Mike noted that the alien was eyeing his weapon again, and couldn't help but think, "Yep, bitch, this is the RN-423 Combined Combat Rifle, the Red Widow. Suck it." He turned the rifle a little to show off the underside where a mini rocket launcher was attached, capable of launching up to 3 rockets. This baby could turn any organic into pink mist, armored or not. Well, as long as it was within the 1,500 meter range, preferably 1 click. There was even a mini flamethrower on the underside for anyone stupid enough to get that close. Sure, it only lasted about 30 seconds, but any enemy within 40 meters of its flames wasn't going to stick around for long. 1200 degrees C, baby. Ataxis saw the human turn his weapon a little, allowing him to see better. He couldn't help but admit it was a nice weapon. Looked sturdy enough to survive the rigors of battle, but light enough to not get in the way of the user. 3 weapons in one, all in all an elegant design. But he carried the superior weapon, the ZFG-55, the Illuminator. It was a plasma pulse rifle, capable of scorching anything within 900 meters, with a burn depth of 80 centimeters. This puppy would burn through anything, organic, ceramic, or metal. Sure, it didn't have the explosive kaboom that the human weapons did, but the Illuminator was meant for precision, not mass destruction. And Ataxis thought, your weapon might destroy more, but what is the point of destroying everything around your enemy? Why not destroy your enemy and keep the infrastructure intact? It even had the option of compressing the plasma to the point it could be propelled and detonate at a distance of 30 or 40 meters. Instant crater. Or you could supercharge the plasma and shoot out a constant beam of light. 1 million degrees. Sure, the beam was 0.5 centimeters wide, and usually ended up fusing the core and resistors, but during those 15 seconds, you had the power of the sun in your hands. Mike looked at Atraxis, who was clearly showing off his weapon too. Still looking at the weapon, he muttered out loud, "Nice." Atraxis heard the sound, immediately translated by the vox box that people every diplomatic mission had to carry. Despite himself, he couldn't help but feel an odd sort of pride showing off his gear. Atraxis was no stranger to war, and had fought on many battlefields. Through his long years of experience, he had learned that people tend to fight with what works best for them. Subpar equipment was rare, and despite being unfamiliar with the weapon, he knew that the gun the human was holding was lethal. Atraxis nodded back, and checked the empty corridor for anyone listening. This was a breach of protocol. The humans weren't enemies, but any form of fraternization could be punished. His faceted eyes darted here and there. When he was sure the coast was clear, he replied, "Thanks. You too." The days wore on, and Atraxis and Mike remained to guard the 2 ambassadors, mostly in silence. As the 2 soldiers had nothing better to do, they watched. Watched the hall, watched each other, watched the ambassadors. On the 3rd day of the meeting, the 2 soldiers realized these talks weren't going to work. They had become mostly shouting matches between the 2 official delegates. The day had closed, with the human ambassador shouting at the Taraxian while referring to his mother. Mike sighed and shook his head. Atraxis stated, "Listen, no offense, but your ambassador is a bit of a bitch." Atraxis was simply stating a fact. Every time his lordship suggested something, the human ambassador would shoot the idea in the egg. Was that the human idiom? It was something like that. Lord Kufri wasn't helping matters by constantly throwing little jabs at her, but he wasn't going to admit that to Mike. Not that he needed to, because Mike shrugged and said, "I know, but your lord guy is acting like a dick. What do you expect?" Who in their right mind would accept to trade off half their territory, including their homeworld, just to have access to the hyperspace trading lanes that went through Taraxis territory? Atraxis couldn't dispute that. Mike was right. The ambassador was being unreasonable. Mike continued, "I just hope she doesn't get so pissed she cuts off diplomatic talks. She kinda liked that. Once you push her in a corner, she comes out biting. Atraxis gave the equivalent of a frown and asked with concern, "She could bite the ambassador?" And privately thought, it might do him the world of good. Mike laughed. "No, it's just a metaphor. I meant she might stop these talks and come back to Earth with a nasty report. She's done it before. And if that happens, guess who is going to have to clean up the mess?" And Mike pointed at himself. "Look, I love my world, and if I have to go down swinging to protect it, then so be it. But it would suck major ass to die because these two dipshits couldn't keep their ego in check." Atraxis nodded. "Fair enough. It is a great honor for any to lay down one's life for the defense of the homeworld. But this... Tell me about it." The two guards heard the Taraxian ambassador before the door even opened. "How dare you even suggest that?" Mike sighed. Oh, for God's sake, what's she done now? And Atraxis muttered, "To be fair, Bajok probably said something stupid again. He's the second son of the former Hive Queen. He thinks that gives him the right to be rude to everyone." Mike shook his head and replied, "Jackass." Before the two guards could say anything, the two ambassadors stormed out of the conference room. Both Mike and Atraxis waited until their respective ambassadors were a full stride in front of them, before stepping out of their position. The two guards surreptitiously stole glances at each other. The following day, Ambassador O'Hare decided it would be a good idea to start the talks at 0600. Bitch. Mike had to get up at 0500, and obviously there was no one to prepare chow. He had gone to his post without having eaten. When he got there, Atraxis was already there. It was difficult to guess the emotion of an alien merely from their facial expression at best of times, but Mike took a wild guess at what was going on in Atraxis' head. He was pissed. The two soldiers took up their previous positions and waited. At around 0800, Mike heard a loud rumble coming from Atraxis. The Taraxian stiffened, and Mike could guess the embarrassment his Taraxian counterpart must have been feeling. Before he could smirk, Mike felt his stomach start to contract, and it was his turn to feel embarrassed. He looked at the Taraxian and asked, "Didn't have time for chow?" as he pulled a cereal bar from one of the many pockets in his jacket. The Taraxian sniffed the air and couldn't detect anything offensive. Mike obviously saw this, but rather than offering some, he took a big bite and shoved half of the bar in his mouth. Atraxis looked with envy as he poured out his own battle ration. It was a packet of stock, the infamous grey goo. No one liked it. The higher-ups had explained to the troops that it contained all the nutrients a soldier needed during combat. He started scooping the goo out of the packet, dreading having to eat this. Suddenly, Atraxis heard, "Fuck! What the fuck is that smell? Jesus H. Christ! Are you really going to put that shit in your mouth? Geez, I thought our bland shit tasted like sawdust, with a flavour of industrial cleaning chemicals, but holy shit. Your sauce smells foul. It's like someone had put the smell of a baboon with diarrhea in that fucking packet. Fuck! Get that shit away from me." Atraxis knew that pain, but fuck that human. If he had to suffer this thing, the human would too. He smiled and brought it closer to Mike, who was backing off, all the while sprouting, "Fuck you! Get that thing away from me!" Atraxis started to chuckle as he stepped towards the human. Mike kept on waving his hand, retreating as much as he could. A few seconds later, Mike started laughing. "Fuck you. Truce, you bitch. Truce. Look, I'll give you half of my granola bar if you put that shit away." Mike pointed the half bar at Atraxis, who stopped for a second. He chuckled again and shrugged. "Fair enough. Let this be the first official trade between our people." Mike started laughing, as Atraxis folded the opening of the packet, which seemed to reseal. As Mike approached, handing Atraxis the half-eaten bar, he laughed. "Fuck, man. You're more patriotic than me. You wouldn't see me fighting for a world that gave me shit like that to eat." Mike went on, as he gave Atraxis half his breakfast food. "What is that stuff? Ground shit with a waft of vomit?" Atraxis was still chewing on his bar, wondering at the explosion of taste in his mouth. It has all the nutrients a soldier would need during combat. Mike looked dubiously at the Tyrexian. Sure, whatever you say, buddy. As he was chewing, Atraxis looked down at Mike's weapon and said, If you're really feeling bad, you could let me have a closer look at your weapon. Mike clutched his weapon a little closer as he laughed. Fuck you, man. I saw you eyeing my gun over the past few days, and I'm telling you now you're only getting my weapon from my cold, dead hands. Atraxis chuckled as he swallowed down the last piece of this granola bar, and good-naturedly quipped, I can arrange that if you really want. The door suddenly opened as Ambassador O'Hare opened the door and shouted, What are you idiots doing? The two soldiers snapped to attention, still swallowing the last of their cereal bar. The rest of the morning passed without incident. It was just after 12 when the two ambassadors emerged again, storming off to their own quarters. Mike found himself quickly trotting after Ambassador O'Hare, looking back at Atraxis, who himself was walking behind his ambassador. When they got to her quarters, Mike plucked up the courage to say, I guess things aren't going well? Ambassador O'Hare cursed and raved. Bloated, self-important jerk. How the hell did a prick like him get this position? She wasn't listening to him, Mike knew, and her question was obviously rhetorical, but Mike actually did know the answer to this one, and so he blurted out, Nepotism. He's the second son of the former Hive Queen. How do you know that? Mike shrugged and replied, Atraxis told me. Who the hell is Atraxis? Mike looked a little bewildered by O'Hare's outburst and carefully replied, The other guard, the Tyraxians. In his head, Mike had no doubt that Atraxis was telling his own ambassador what he knew. What exactly have you been discussing with this Atraxis? Nothing much, just soldier stuff. Guns, chow, and... O'Hare looked increasingly frantic as she prompted, And? State officials. O'Hare was pouring herself a stiff drink of whiskey and dryly asked, And what were the results of such an intellectual debate? Mike looked sheepishly at the person who represented his entire race and muttered, Well, guns are cool, chow sucks, and... Go on, prompted the ambassador. Well, I mean, state officials are dicks. O'Hare looked at the soldier in front of her and blinked, a full second, before bursting out in laughter. Maybe we should have you two knuckleheads spearheading these talks. You two have quietly agreed on more than that bloated oaf and myself have in the past week. Mike stared at the ambassador and asked, So, what now?